He's too quiet to be dangerous. He's just a businessman in a tailored suit. You have no idea why no one ever escapes me. Aaliyah didn't flinch when they handed her over to the Dragon of Soul. She trembled only when Han Tae-jin unbuttoned his white shirt, revealing the dark ink that marked her as his property. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw the cold, controlled calm in his eyes. But it wasn't until their first night, trapped in his private estate, that the truth cracked open. He wasn't soft. He wasn't powerless. And when he stepped toward her, his tattooed hands tracing her jaw with calculated precision, not out of love but dominance, she finally understood. She hadn't been invited into his world. She had been claimed by a man who never lets his guard down. Welcome back to Afrokoreanstoryspace, besties. This story is for everyone who loves a man with a dangerous secret. If you are watching right now, drop a heart in the comments so I know you're here. To my loyal besties, if you leave before you see what Tae-jin is truly capable of, you'll be thinking about this ending all night long. Comment, ready, if you're prepared for the heat and suspense Aaliyah is about to face. The rain in Seoul didn't wash things clean. It only made the neon lights bleed into the pavement like open wounds. Aaliyah stood in the corner of a windowless office that smelled of expensive tobacco and old fear, her fingers digging into the palms of her hands. She watched her uncle, the man who had promised to protect her after she moved to Korea for her studies, bow so low his forehead nearly touched the mahogany desk. He wasn't just apologizing. He was begging for his life. He had gambled away money that didn't belong to him, $300,000 belonging to the city's most silent shadows. Across from him sat Han Tae-jin. He didn't look like a monster. He sat with a controlled, dangerous calm, his dark hair perfectly styled and his white shirt crisp despite the late hour. He didn't raise his voice or throw a single threat. He simply watched the desperate man crawl, his sharp jawline set in an expression of bored authority. To Aaliyah, he looked like a businessman, perhaps a bit cold, but ultimately a man of reason. She thought his stillness was a sign of a fading fire, a weakness she could navigate. "I don't want your apologies," Tae-jin finally said, his voice a deep, melodic baritone that made the air in the room feel heavy. "And I don't want the money you no longer have." He stood up, moving with the grace of a predator who had already won the hunt. He ignored her uncle entirely, his piercing eyes locking onto Aaliyah instead. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch, a strange flutter stirring in her stomach that she tried to stifle with anger. He walked around the desk until he was inches from her, close enough for her to smell his expensive cologne. "Your niece," Tae-jin murmured, his eyes tracing the soft, expressive features of her face and the natural curls framing it. "She is the only thing you have left of value." Aaliyah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected her uncle to protest, to fight, but the silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The transaction was made in a single, cowardly glance. Her life was no longer her own. It had been traded to settle a debt in a world she didn't understand. Tae-jin reached out, his hand surprisingly gentle as his thumb brushed her deep brown skin. "Don't look at him, Aaliyah," he whispered, his slight accent wrapping around her name like a velvet leash. "He didn't sell you. He simply surrendered you to me." The black sedan glided through the iron gates of the estate like a ghost cutting through the Seoul mist. Aaliyah sat in the back seat, her natural curls pressed against the cold window as she watched the glittering skyline of the city retreat, replaced by the suffocating luxury of Han Tae-jin's private world. Every inch of the sprawling grounds felt designed to remind her of his reach. The stone walls were high, the security guards moved with a silent military precision, and the air itself seemed to grow heavy with the scent of pine and power. When the car door opened, the chill of the night air bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold weight in her chest. She was led through the massive mahogany doors into a foyer that felt more like a museum than a home. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting her wide, alert eyes and the way her hands trembled against the fabric of her clothes. She felt like a stranger in her own body, a prized acquisition being brought to its display case. Aaliyah was ushered upstairs to a sprawling master suite where a garment hung waiting for her. It wasn't just a dress. It was a masterpiece of white silk and delicate lace, shimmering under the crystal chandelier like fallen snow. But as she ran her fingers over the cool fabric, she didn't feel like a bride. She felt the heavy pull of invisible links. This dress was the wedding dress of her new life, a uniform of surrender that felt more like chains than a celebration. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic rhythm of her heart. She looked at the expansive windows overlooking Seoul, the city where she was supposed to be a student, a girl with dreams and a future. Now those streets looked like a different world entirely. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth she hadn't earned and a man she didn't truly know. She began to dress, her movements slow and mechanical. Each button she fastened felt like a seal on a contract she had never wanted to sign. As the silk settled against her deep brown skin, emphasizing her vulnerability, she realized that this luxury was a distraction. The soft rugs and gold leaf accents were meant to hide the bars of her cell. She was no longer Aaliyah Monroe, the girl with a voice and a choice. She was a possession of the Mafia, waiting for the man who had bought her silence to come and claim his prize. The door to the suite opened with a soft, decisive click that sounded like a gavel in the silence of the room. Aaliyah turned, her breath hitching as Han Tae-jin stepped inside. He had discarded his suit jacket, and his white shirt was now open at the collar, the sleeves rolled back to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle and etched with the dark, intricate tails of a dragon tattoo. He moved with a quiet, terrifying grace that reminded her of a predator entering its own territory. Completely at ease, completely in control. In the soft glow of the chandelier. His features were even sharper than they had been in the office. His jawline was a blade of granite, and his dark hair was swept back with a discipline that mirrored his posture. He was handsome in a way that felt like a warning, a beauty so cold and structured that it made her skin prickle with an uncomfortable heat. Aaliyah forced her chin up, her natural curls bouncing slightly as she tried to project a strength she didn't feel, but her wide eyes betrayed her. He didn't speak at first. He simply stopped a few feet away and looked at her. It wasn't just a glance. His piercing eyes studied her like a prized acquisition, cataloging her fear, her defiance, and the way the white silk of the dress clung to her deep brown skin. Those eyes were like polished obsidian, dark, reflective, and impossible to read. They made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her trembling hands and straight into the thoughts she was trying so hard to hide. "The dress suits you," he said, his deep voice vibrating through the space between them. The slight Korean accent gave his words a rhythmic quality that felt almost hypnotic. "I didn't choose it," Aaliyah countered, her voice coming out as a strained whisper. She wanted to look away, to break the hold of those intense, unblinking eyes, but she found herself rooted to the spot. There was a magnetic pull to his presence, a sense of gravity that drew her toward him even as every instinct screamed at her to run. Tae-jin took a single step closer, reducing the distance until she could smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne mixed with the faint metallic tang of the night rain. "In this house, Aaliyah, choice is a luxury you no longer have to worry about." He reached out not to touch her, but to trace the air just inches from her shoulder. The controlled, dangerous calm of his movements made her stomach flip in a way she couldn't categorize. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that she had completely underestimated the man behind the businessman's mask. He wasn't just holding her passport. He was holding her very breath in the palm of his hand. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of the oversized shirt slipping further off her shoulder as she sought a sense of protection that didn't exist. She needed a weapon, and since she had no physical power, she reached for the only thing she had left, her voice. She watched Tae-jin as he leaned against the heavy oak dresser, looking far too comfortable for a man who had just stolen a woman's life. A small, bitter smile played on her lips, a fragile shield forged from sarcasm to hide the fact that her knees were ready to buckle. "Is this the part where I'm supposed to be impressed?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She let her gaze wander lazily over his expensive clothes and the pristine room, injecting as much boredom into her tone as she could muster. The big, bad mafia boss buys a girl because he can't find one who actually wants to be here. It's a bit cliché, don't you think? Tae-jin didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just watched her with that same controlled, dangerous calm. His expression unreadable. His silence was suffocating, so she pushed harder, desperate to find a crack in his armor. She looked at his sharp features and then down at his hands, where the ink of the dragon seemed to shift under the light. I've heard the rumors about men who have to buy their power, Aaliyah continued, her words dripping with a forced bravado. They say all that control in the boardroom is just a cover for what's lacking behind closed doors. You spend so much time making people bow that I wonder if you even know how to make a woman actually feel something. Or maybe, she added, her eyes flashing with a dangerous spark, you're just too old and too used to getting your way to actually satisfy anyone. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The insult hung between them, sharp and jagged. Aaliyah held her breath, waiting for the explosion, for the anger, for anything that would prove he was human and not just a statue of ice and ink. She wanted to hurt his pride, to make him feel as small as she felt in that white silk cage. Instead, Tae-jin straightened up slowly. There was no rage in his eyes, only a flickering light that looked terrifyingly like amusement. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his presence suddenly doubled. He began to walk toward her, his movements silent and fluid. You think my silence is a lack of fire, Aaliyah, he murmured, his voice dropping to a low, predatory growl. You think because I don't shout I don't possess? You're using your tongue like a blade because you're terrified of what happens when the talking stops. He stopped just inches away, the heat radiating from his disciplined frame making her skin prickle. You doubt my ability to satisfy. He tilted his head, his piercing eyes locking onto hers with a finality that made her shield of sarcasm shatter into 1,000 pieces. Careful, little bird. Some truths are far more overwhelming than the lies you tell yourself to feel safe. Tae-jin did not explode with the anger Aaliyah had tried to provoke. Instead, he became a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room with his sheer presence. He moved with the grace of a predator, a silent, fluid motion that made her realize his stillness had never been a sign of age or weakness. It was the coiled tension of a hunter who knew the prey had nowhere to run. As he closed the distance, the space between them vanished, and with it, the last of Aaliyah's perceived safety. She tried to step back, but the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window pressed against her spine, trapping her between the glittering lights of Seoul and the shadow of the man before her. He stopped inches away, so close that the heat radiating from his disciplined frame felt like a physical weight against her deep brown skin. He didn't grab her. He didn't have to. The way his piercing eyes locked onto hers was enough to pin her in place. Aaliyah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, her wide, alert eyes tracing the sharp jawline and the silver-dark hair that gave him the look of a man who had mastered both time and power. Up close, the athletic discipline of his body was undeniable, filling out his open white shirt in a way that made her previous taunts feel like a child's whisper against a storm. You have a lot of courage for someone who understands so little, he murmured, his deep voice carrying a slight Korean accent that sent a shiver down her spine. He reached out, his hand moving with a slow, agonizing deliberation. His fingers didn't strike. They traced the line of her trembling jaw with a touch that was surprisingly gentle, yet carried the absolute weight of possession. It was a cold, calculated intimacy that shattered her facade of sarcasm. Aaliyah's breath hitched as she looked up at him, caught between a rising desire she hated and a dawning fear she couldn't escape. The realization hit her like ice through her veins. He wasn't just a man holding a debt. He was a force of nature who had claimed her long before she stepped into this room. The predator's grace wasn't just in how he moved. It was in the way he stood there, watching her realize that her cage was not only gilded, but guarded by a man who never truly let his guard down. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating, until Tae-jin reached for the buttons of his cuffs. Aaliyah watched, her breath hitching, as he slowly rolled back his sleeves with the same terrifying deliberation he brought to everything else. As the white fabric retreated, the truth of Han Tae-jin was finally laid bare. His arms were not the withered limbs of an aging businessman. They were a canvas of violence and history, corded with the lean, hard muscle of a man who had fought for every inch of his empire. Black ink swirled across his skin in a masterpiece of traditional Korean artistry. A massive dragon coiled around his right forearm, its scales so detailed they seemed to shimmer under the chandelier's light, its claws digging into the pulse of his wrist. Aaliyah found herself staring, her wide eyes tracing the lines of the ink against his tanned skin. It was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a jagged blade. "Every line you see has a cost, Aaliyah," he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly hum that vibrated in the small space between them. He held his arm out, not touching her, but allowing her to see the jagged white scars that peeked through the black ink like ghosts. "In the underground, we don't use contracts signed in ink alone. We use blood. These dragons were earned in the back alleys of Busan and the high-rises of Gangnam. They are symbols of the men I've broken and the family I've built from nothing." He turned his hand over, showing her a specific mark near his elbow, a set of ancient characters surrounded by a crown of thorns. "This one," he murmured, his piercing eyes never leaving her face, "represents the first time I had to take a life to keep my own. I was younger than you are now." Aaliyah felt a cold shiver race down her spine. The sarcasm she had used as a shield earlier felt like a toy sword against the reality of the man standing before her. She had thought his tattoos were merely an aesthetic choice, a way to look intimidating. She realized now they were a warning label. The ink was a record of his ruthlessness, a map of why no one ever escaped his orbit. "You asked if I could satisfy you," he reminded her, his shadow falling over her as he stepped even closer, the scent of his sharp cologne mixing with the metallic tang of his history. "Understand this. I do nothing halfway. When I claim something, I protect it with the same violence that earned these marks. And I never, ever let it go." The realization settled in her gut like lead. He wasn't just a boss. He was a warrior who had survived a world of monsters by becoming the most dangerous one of all. And now, she was the only thing his tattooed hands wanted to hold. When the door finally closed behind Tae-jin, leaving Aaliyah alone with the heavy scent of his cologne and the echo of his warnings, she didn't collapse. Instead, her wide, alert eyes darted around the room, fueled by a desperate, frantic energy. She had to find a way out. She began to tear through the suite with silent, trembling hands, checking the velvet-lined drawers of the mahogany desk and the pockets of the expensive coats hanging in the walk-in closet. She was looking for her passport, the small blue booklet that represented her identity, her citizenship, and her only hope of returning to the life she knew. She found it in the top drawer of a small safe that had been left intentionally ajar, as if Tae-jin wanted her to see the futility of her situation. She grabbed the leather cover, a sob of relief catching in her throat, but as she flipped it open, a single card fell out. It wasn't a credit card or a room key. It was a black card embossed with the gold dragon emblem of the Han family. Taped to the back was a handwritten note in sharp, elegant script. "The gates only open for me." Aaliyah ran to the heavy suite door and pulled, but it didn't budge. There was no keyhole, only a sleek biometric scanner that glowed a mocking red. She rushed to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sprawling estate below. From this height, the security guards looked like chess pieces moving across a board, and the iron gate she had passed through earlier seemed a mile away. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just in a foreign country. She was in a void where Aaliyah Monroe no longer existed. Her university enrollment, her flight records, her very existence had been scrubbed and replaced by the title of Tae-jin's wife. He didn't just have her passport. He had her future. He owned the air she breathed and the ground she stood on. She looked back at the white silk dress discarded on the bed, its lace shimmering like a spider's web. Every luxury in the room, the high thread count sheets, the crystal carafes, the gold leaf accents, now felt like a weight designed to keep her pinned to the floor. She wasn't a guest, and she wasn't just a bride. She was a bird in a gilded cage, and the man who held the key was the only person who could decide if she ever saw the sun again. The weight of her entrapment settled over her, heavy and absolute, as she realized that in Tae-jin's world, freedom was a ghost she could no longer chase. Aaliyah was still staring at the biometric scanner, her fingers numbed by the cold reality of her confinement, when the door hissed open. Tae-jin stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. He didn't look like a captor. He looked like a man weary from the weight of a crown he never asked for, yet wore with lethal precision. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the tossed drawers and the passport clutched in her trembling hand. "There is nowhere to go, Aaliyah," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to hum through the very floorboards. "You kidnapped me," she spat, her voice cracking as she held the useless blue booklet toward him like a shield. "You bought me from a man who had no right to sell me. You're keeping me here in this museum of a prison. How is any of this right?" Tae-jin walked toward her, his pace slow and rhythmic. He didn't stop until he was standing at the edge of the window, looking out at the sprawling neon-soaked labyrinth of Seoul. "Right is a word for people who have the luxury of safety. Your uncle didn't just lose money. He lost his life the moment he took a loan from the Black River Syndicate. If I hadn't stepped in, you wouldn't be standing in a silk shirt in a heated suite. You would be in a shipping container on your way to a port in Southeast Asia." He turned to face her, his expression a mask of controlled, dangerous calm. "I didn't buy you to humiliate you. I bought you to hide you. Outside these walls, there are men who see your beauty as currency and your life as a disposable asset. To them, you are a debt to be collected in blood." Aaliyah looked at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to believe he was the villain, the sole architect of her misery. But the dark, ancient intensity in his eyes told a different story. He was offering her a choice that wasn't a choice at all. "You think I'm the monster because I hold the key," Tae-jin murmured, stepping closer until the scent of his sharp cologne filled her senses. "But nothing about survival is wrong, Aaliyah. You can hate the cage, or you can realize it is the only thing keeping the wolves away." He reached out, his thumb brushing the deep brown of her cheek with a tenderness that felt more terrifying than a blow. "Choose. Walk out those gates and belong to the world, or stay here and belong to me. But know this, only one of us will keep you breathing." Aaliyah looked at the door, then back at the man who had claimed her. The realization was a bitter pill. Her freedom was a death sentence, and her only hope for survival lay in the hands of the man who had stolen it. The air in the suite grew thick, charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a violent storm. Aaliyah stood her ground, though her breath was coming in shallow hitches. She looked at Tae-jin, at the open collar of his white shirt and the lethal grace of his tattooed arms, and felt the final remnants of her defiance flickering like a dying candle. She had called him old. She had called him soft. She had banked everything in the hope that his power was merely a collection of suits, guards, and bank accounts. "You speak of survival as if it's a chore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you're just a man, Tae-jin. A man who hides behind walls because he's too tired to fight his own battles." Tae-jin's reaction was not a flare of temper, but a total, chilling transformation. The relaxed lean against the dresser vanished. In a movement so fast her eyes could barely track it, he was across the room. He didn't strike her. He simply moved into her space, his body a wall of tempered steel that forced her back against the edge of the silk-covered bed. The controlled calm she had mistaken for weakness was now revealed as the coiled tension of a weapon. "You want to know why no one ever escapes me, Aaliyah?" he murmured, his voice a low, predatory rasp that made the hair on her arms stand up. "It's not because of the gates. It's not because of the money." He reached out, his hand locking onto the bedpost beside her head with a strength that made the heavy-wood groan. The muscles in his arm bunched, the dragon tattoos twisting as if they were coming to life. He leaned in until his lips were inches from her ear, his heat enveloping her. "It's because I don't just break bones. I break wills," he whispered. "You thought my age had made me a spectator in my own life. You thought my calm was a lack of fire." He straightened, and with a single effortless motion, he gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany nightstand and shifted it aside as if it were made of balsa wood, clearing the space between them. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with a raw, disciplined power that left her breathless. "I am the fire, Aaliyah, and you are the only thing I have chosen to keep from burning." At that moment, the revelation was complete. Aaliyah looked up at Han Tae-jin and finally saw the man behind the myth. He wasn't powerless. He was a king who had spent decades perfecting the art of the hunt. Her wide, alert eyes met his, and for the first time, the fear was replaced by a staggering, heavy realization. She wasn't just trapped in a cage. She was in the arms of the only man strong enough to hold her world together. As he reached for her, his touch firm and undeniable, she understood the truth. No one escaped him because once he claimed you, there was nowhere else in the world you would ever want to be.